What's up, sports bettors? Alex here, and I have tons of player props for today, including these on Underdog Fantasy. So I'm on Russell over 6 assists, Levine over 4 assists, Butler over 6 rebounds, and 2 hockey props in a 5 pick entry. I say this all the time. You exclusively want to be going with 3 pick and 5 pick entries on Underdog Fantasy. And that's because you're getting the best implied juice at minus 122. So this may be confusing to like new sports bettors because if you look at Underdog Fantasy, there are no odds. It's not a sports book, it's a fantasy site, but it's really just a parlay only sports book. And what you're going to notice is on this platform, any 3 picks you select, you're going to be betting 250 to win 1.5K, which is equivalent to a 3 leg parlay on a sports book where every bet is at minus 122 odds. You can see 250 would be your stake. Your payout would be 1506 if all legs in your parlay were at minus 122 odds. Now for a 5 pick entry, 250 to win 5K, also minus 122. So Underdog Fantasy offers, essentially the implied prices of minus 122 for 3 pick and 5 pick entries. So when you're betting on Underdog, you should assume you're getting minus 122. So I'll go through an example of like some of the plays I kind of went with on Underdog on Prize Picks. We'll also go through some flex play math. But mainly, let's just explain the tools as well. So the way I use this tool, this is called the OddsJam screen, is I kind of use this like a little scanner. I'm scanning for where are sportsbooks setting the lines at different levels from each other. So you can see right now there's not a ton out there except for this first one, Markelle Fultz, right? Prize Picks has his line at 7.5. Underdog has his line at 8. All the sports books have his line at 7.5. So maybe there's some value on the under 8 on Underdog Fantasy, right? But there's a reason I didn't rush to bet this, and that's that, you can see sports books, they do have the over 7.5, assists favored for Fultz. So they're projecting, the bookmakers, on Underdog Fantasy, they don't vary payouts depending on if you select the overs or the unders, right? You'll never see this multiplier change. But on sportsbooks, they do, right? And you can see they imply that through their odds. DraftKings has the over 7.5 assists at minus 140. They have the under at plus 110. So lines are juiced in favor of the over, right? So DraftKings, they're telling you the over is more likely to occur. So maybe we want to hold off on this because the juice is all the way up at minus 140. Long story short. But what I did end up going with, and it ended up moving, so I know a lot of people are going to be like, why are you explaining this pick if it ended up moving? But the point is, the point of the OddsJam YouTube is to also kind of explain to you the strategy of how you can think like a sharp, think like a data-driven bettor, and actually find value. A lot of my plays are good, so they're going to move. They're not going to be available for 3 hours. So one of the plays I went with is Zach LaVine over 4 assists. I took him over 4, as you can see right here, and they bumped it up. I mean, Underdog is always bumping my plays. I got over 4 assists. A lot of people were able to tail, but you can see now it's at 4.5. So that's usually a good sign as a sports bettor. If you bet the over and the sportsbook moves the over, up half of an assist, that's typically, that typically means like you got down a pretty good play. So I ended up taking LaVine over 4, and that's not the same bet as over 4.5 assists, right? If LaVine has 4 assists, you're not going to win if you have over 4.5. You're going to push or tie if you have over 4. So if LaVine has 4 assists, this isn't a loss. My 5-pick parlay will become a 4-pick parlay if LaVine has exactly 4 assists. If I had over 4.5 and he had 4 assists, this would already have lost. So it really is, these extra half rebounds, these half points of value mean a lot, especially for a player that doesn't get a lot of assists like Zach LaVine. Like his line is 4.5. If you look at Fultz, his line is 7.5, 8. So for Fultz, 8 versus 9 is less important, or 7.5 versus 8, as an example, is less of a big jump than if we go down right here, Zach LaVine, 4 versus 4.5. And if that doesn't make sense, like you can think about it in the NBA, if a total is 220 versus 220 one, it's not that big of a deal, right? There's not that big of a jump in the odds. But for over 6 goals versus over 5 goals in hockey, like that's a massive jump, right? Because the number's a lot lower, the distribution's a lot lower. In an NBA game, there could be like 180 to like 280 points. I mean, maybe that's a little too extreme, but in a hockey match, right, there's like, there's 1 to whatever, like 10 or whatever it is. So the point is when the distribution is centered around a lower number, these jumps are more significant. So like player passing TDs, 1.5 versus 2.5 passing TDs, like that's a big jump for Josh Allen in the odds. Whereas, LeBron James, 29.5 points versus 30.5 points, not as big of a jump. So long story short, I was able to get over 4 because Underdog was at 4. Prize Picks, all the sports books were at 4.5 at the time. And sure, sports books have the under favored, but there's not a ton of juice, right? Like it's not like this. Like you can see here, DeRozan's at 5, FanDuel's at 5.5, but FanDuel has the under at minus 160. Here, it's a lower number, so the distribution is, again, centered around a lower number, and also the juice is like minus 125, minus 130, so that's definitely good value being able to get over 4. So again, that's how I use the screen, right? I'm looking for where is Underdog, where are Prize Picks setting the line at different levels from one another. And then, of course, I also use this EV tool, So here you can see I'm filtering for Prize Picks and Underdog Fantasy, 2, bookmakers located in Virginia. But depending on where you're located, you may have different sports books available to you. I say it all the time, but like more sports books is merrier. If you're just using Underdog, get Prize Picks. Why? Because I found this incredible play on Prize Picks, Martin Nikas, under 3.5 shots on goal. And if you only had Underdog, you would have missed this, right? Not all sports books have the same lines. That's why sometimes I have videos on Underdog. Sometimes I have videos on Prize Picks. Underdog Fantasy is minus 122 implied odds for 3-pick and 5-pick entries. Prize Picks is minus 119 for 5 and 6-pick flex plays. Sometimes I find more value on Underdog. They're asleep at the wheel. They're screwing up, like this play on Zach LaVine. Prize Picks never had it at 4. They always had it at 4.5, so there was never any value on Prize Picks, only on Underdog. So what you can see is this play is available on Prize Picks at minus 119 implied odds in a 5 or 6-pick flex play. And we'll run through the math of a flex play. But more importantly, you can see remember, Prize Picks and Underdog, they don't vary your payouts depending on if you select the overs or the unders. You can see right here, 20 to win 60, 20 to win 60. Like they don't have any juice on their platforms because they're fantasy sites. They're not allowed to. Like by law, they're not allowed to vary the payouts and show odds. That's how, like Underdog, it's Underdog Fantasy. It's not Underdog Sportsbook. And they're also legal in states where sports betting isn't legal, right? You can play Underdog Fantasy in California. You can't play on DraftKings, even though sports betting, because sports betting is technically still illegal in California. Of course, you can bet on like Bovada and Bet Online and the offshore sports books, but you get the point. There's no DraftKings or FanDuel. But long story short, like these platforms, they don't vary payouts depending on if you select the over or the under. So what you want to find is spots like this, where all the sports books, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sports books, this OddsJam column. We just copy the odds from Pinnacle, which is the sharpest bookmaker in the world, known to be the most efficient betting market. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sports books all have the under for Martin Nikas heavily favored, minus 145 to minus 174. And again, every sports book sets lines independently. It's not just Prize Picks, it's also the sports books. They're all setting lines independently. So, we don't have a perfect answer as to should this be minus 145 or minus 174. But the way I like to think of it is, imagine you had a bunch of different stock exchanges and there's some stock. FanDuel's telling you it's worth 152, Caesars 154, DraftKings 145, BetOnline 154, and then Pinnacle, the biggest stock exchange, the most important one with the most betting volume, the most efficient market, telling you it's worth 174. It's like, do you want to get this at 119? And it's like, yeah, that's a steal deal. It's value. And like people talk about it all the time, like, oh, value doesn't matter in sports betting. It's like, what do you think every investor and day trader focuses on? It's finding value. I don't know anything about this player. Couldn't recognize him if you showed me a picture. Never really heard his name before I placed this bet. Yeah, I probably bet on him before, but all I know is I've 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sports books all telling me the under should be heavily, heavily favored, and I can get this on Prize Picks at minus 119 implied odds. Seems pretty good. So I hit it, right? I also went with, here are some other ones. For the sports books you select and kind of whatever settings you set up, like I say it all the time, bet on every sport. Like I have in my underdog entry, NHL, NBA, I don't care, right? I'm following the value. I'm a day trader. I'm looking for value. I didn't wake up today and say I want to bet on Jimmy Butler over 6 boards, right? I looked at the sports books. They all had the over at 6.5 without much juice in either direction. And I was like, yeah, that's a play I want to go with because there's value, because I found an edge, right? I don't know anything about this Nikas guy. All I know is every bookmaker is telling me this bet is incredible at minus 119. So what I ended up going with, and then I'll take some time to run through the math of a flex play, is right here. Martin Nikas under 3.5 shots on goal. Burns over 2.5. So that's the same play from Underdog Fantasy, right? So I'm betting it at minus 122. So you can see here, it's less good on Underdog Fantasy, or less profitable because the implied odds are slightly worse. But still, it was a good play to include. And his shot on goal line actually moved more towards the over at the time I bet it on Underdog. So what I ended up going with, you can see right here, is Nurse under 2.5 shots on goal, Nico under 3, Jake over 2.5, Brent Burns over 2.5, and Martin Nikas under 3.5. And here are the payouts for a 5-pick flex play, right? If you go 5 for 5, it's plus 900 odds, right? You're 10xing your money. So $100 turns into 1,000, but that's not $1,000 of profit because you bet 100. So it's 900 profit plus your $100 stake. Now, if you go 4 for 5, it's, plus 100 odds. It's not plus 200 odds. You bet 100, you're getting back 200, 100 of which is profit. And then if you go 3 for 5, it pays you out 40. But you bet 100, so you actually lost $60, right? You didn't win if you go 3 for 5 in a 5-pick flex play on Prize Picks. So here are the 5 plays I went with, and we can go through the math very briefly, right? Because, we're betting $100. That's actually very annoyingly, Prize Picks caps my bet size now to $100. They only let me bet $100, which is pretty frustrating. But I was taking them for, too much. So they're only letting me bet 100. But long story short is if we go 0 for 5 in a flex play, right, we lose 100. If you go 1 of 5, 2 of 5, you lose 100. If my stake is $100, right, I can add a column. Like stake is $100. So if you're betting $100, if you win 0, 1, or 2, right, you're down $100. If you go 3 for 5, you can see right here, you're getting back $40, so you're down 60. If you go 4 for 5, your payout, you're $100 richer. It's not $200, you're getting $100 in profit, right? So this is like your net profit. So I guess not payout, right? If you bet 100, you're getting back 0, so your net profit is negative 100. If you go 3 of 5, you're getting back 40, your net profit is negative 60. You go 4 for 5, you're getting back 200, so your net profit is 100. You go 5 of 5, your net profit's 900. So what you can assume is, what Prize Picks is assuming and what they typically assume is that recreational sports bettors are winning just 50% of the time on over-unders, right? Prize Picks assumes that you can't beat them much more than 50% of the time on over-unders. That's a sportsbook business model, right? They put out lines, over-unders. They assume, people are going to bet the over, people are going to bet the under in equal amounts, and they're just going to take their spread, right? They're going to make a risk-free spread, and that's called the VIG or the juice, right? Like Prize Picks is hoping people bet on Frank under and they bet on Frank over in equal amounts, and they just make their spread. And if people, are only winning 50% of the time, it's pretty crazy. But a flex play is bad by 25%. A 6-pick flex play is negative EV, or the profit margin is, for every $100 you bet, you'll lose 25 in the long run as a recreational bettor. Now, what we can do is you can say, okay, let's look at this Nikas play. Pinnacle, they have the under heavily favored at minus 174, right? So because the under's favored on all the sports books, we know that this under is winning more than 50% of the time. It's not winning 50% of the time. So if we go to this no vig odds calculator, you can see Pinnacle, they have the over at plus 130, the under at minus 174. So the under is favored, right? And it's going to be hitting 59.36% of the time, according to the betting market on Pinnacle. So what this no vig odds calculator does is this is like a very simple formula. Is all it does is it takes the sportsbooks market and tells you the win probability for your bet based on their odds. Right? So Pinnacle is the most bullish on the under. They have the under minus 174. A lot more favored than DraftKings. DraftKings only has it minus 145. So obviously, Pinnacle thinks the under is more likely to occur than DraftKings. They have the under a lot more favored, a lot more juiced, right? Like you have to remember, if an under is minus 200, that means it's a 2-1 favorite. So it's hitting 66.67% of the time, right? Minus 300 is 3-1 favorite, so 75% of the time. Minus 900 is a 9-1 favorite. It's hitting 90% of the time, right? So sportsbooks imply win probabilities through their odds. If there's a UFC fighter who's minus 900, the sportsbook is telling you, okay, we're pricing him at 90% to win, 9-1 favorite, right? So here, when the under is minus 174, the over is plus 130, Pinnacle saying, hey, this bet is winning 59.36% of the time. So if we put that number into our little flex play calculation, that would mean if you could find every play, if you could get every play 59.36% to win, your flex plays would be profitable by 38%, right? For every $100 you bet in the long run, you're not going to win every bet still, but your bets are going to have 38, bucks in profit margin. That's just the math. Now, of course, Pinnacle is a lot more bullish than, let's say, DraftKings. DraftKings only thinks this should be minus 145. They have the over at plus 115, the under at minus 145. So even though Pinnacle is the sharpest bookmaker in the world, but DraftKings, they're also putting out odds. We want to look at all data we have in the market. So we can take their line, and they're saying it's, 0.5599. So according to DraftKings, if we got, all bets, let's say, were 56% roughly to win, then our flex play would be good by $12. For every $100 we bet in the long run, we're going to earn a 12% ROI. So basically, depending on the win probability, for each of your entries, the profit margin of your flex play is going to vary. But what you're hoping for is that, let's say you can find plays on average that are winning 56% of the time, then your profit margin is going to be 12% in the long run. So that's what OddsJam is showing you, right? OddsJam is just showing you, when we're showing you value at minus 119, it's just showing you plays that are winning, enough to make 5-pick or 6-pick flex plays profitable. Like this play is obviously incredibly profitable. It's the best one. But this one on Brent Burns has a true price of 122.65. So 122.65 means, in a similar way to, we can go through this math briefly, but in the similar way to a 2-1 favorite is you just do, 200 divided by 300. That means they're 66.6% to win. If someone's a minus 122 favorite, minus 122.65, then, they're 55.1% to win. So a lot of math, a lot of numbers, but, hopefully it kind of makes sense as the win probability goes up. As sportsbooks have the odds more juiced in favor of what you're betting on, the better the play gets. It's really that simple. So hopefully this was helpful, and let's make money.